and welcome back to a mindful moment.
Hi, everybody.
I really saw a sort of a theme in the last week with my coaching clients. It was challenges with relationships. And it really kind of brought back to me the difference in my relationships since I started practicing mindfulness, and even things like how much better my marriage could have been if I'd understood mindfulness at the time. So, of course, most of my clients were having trouble with either a boss or an employee, but they were really challenging, like to the point of causing major anxiety. And I thought, oh, I do know mindfulness really corrects a lot of those problems we have in any kind of relationship.
Absolutely. I know that my marriage, if I did not have mindfulness as a tool, we'd probably be in a much different place in our
Yeah.
marriage. We're in a very good place. So,
Yeah. And amazingly, both people don't have to be mindful,
no.
right? It can be just us. Like if we practice it, it changes sort of the trajectory of conversations. I don't want to say it's contagious, but it does cause the other party to change their conversation, right?
If you think about it, like one ego by itself is kind of just like a person on an island. But when you have two egos in a relationship that are out of control or don't really know how to manage emotions, then it's just recipe for chaos.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so much conflict comes out of this because it is ego based. But when you practice mindfulness, there's so many tenets of it. For instance, one of the key practices is active or mindful listening. And I know, especially in my younger days, I spent the majority of my time during a, let's say, discussion or a disagreement, focusing on either nitpicking apart what the other person was saying so that I would know what to attack, or coming up with whatever I was going to say in response. And I wasn't really listening. And I think the majority of us just do that as a default.
Yeah. I think
So,
listening is probably our biggest weakness as a species.
yeah. And again, it's ego driven. We want to be right. We want to win the discussion or the argument or the disagreement. And so what happens is, because we're not really listening, we're not understanding what the real problem is.
Hmm. Yeah.
So that's one area that I know completely changed my relationships, was when I learned to quiet that impulse to think about what I wanted to say while someone else was talking. It made a huge difference because all of a sudden I understood, oh, it's not even the issue isn't even what we're talking about. This person is in pain or has a need or is misunderstanding something. And I need to like let them share with me and then not react, which is another piece of it, right? But respond thoughtfully, or be willing to say, I need to think about this before I say anything because I need to process it.
I think too frequently we take things at face value. Like we hear somebody say something and we automatically go, oh, well, that's what that means.
Yeah,
But we don't usually go, I wonder what they really mean by that. Or I wonder what's actually going on. We just, and it could be laziness. It could be, we just don't have the capacity, mental capacity to go ahead and try to figure it out. But I think that if we could just stop for a minute and go, I wonder if they're really mad about that or if this is more about something different.
it's taking the time for that sort of intro or reflection
Hmm.
to process how you're interpreting it. And then also, most of us don't in regular conversation paraphrase back what we think we heard. And that's another thing I've learned to do, especially when it's in a disagreement, is to say, if I'm hearing you right, you're saying, and I repeat back what I heard, because frequently what someone is saying and what someone else hears is not the same thing.
No, we teach it in our workshops too. Like, okay, I want you to close your eyes and I want you to visualize a tree. My tree is a palm tree. Your tree could be a maple tree. It's just because it's tree does not mean it's the same thing. So it's the same thing with somebody telling you something or having a conversation with you.
Yeah,
What they're trying to say to you highly depends on how you receive what they're trying to say to you.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. And again, most of this, I mean, I was never taught this ever in my life. It was through mindfulness that I started to learn just how much we miscommunicate. And of course, it's because our ego is always in the background going, you're right, they're wrong. And so it just skews any conversation that you're trying to have if there's any sort of a disagreement in it. But aside from disagreements, there's also an interesting aspect, which is you develop more empathy for other people because when you're really listening, you are feeling sort of their pain or their angst or whatever, they're sharing with you. And one of the things we do, so if it's not a disagreement, let's say it's a friend telling you about something that has upset them, and you immediately start thinking, "Oh, I know how that feels. I've had that
Mhm.
happen before." And now you're thinking about all of your past experiences while they're trying to tell you about their current experience.
I've learned it's funny because before I actually learned about mindfulness and everything, I can look back now and see that I was that person. I was always like trying to find something. And in my brain, it was like, oh, I'm just trying to find something that connects us. I'm not
Right.
trying to talk over them. I'm not trying to not listen. I just went to have a bond with this person. But in
Yeah.
reality, it's not really bonding with them. You're really just talking about yourself and you're not taking in what they're really giving to you. And it's funny now, I used to talk a lot. And now I find when I go out with friends, I almost never get a word in because I just listen. And I get to the point where it's like, well, I really don't have much to say because they've really come to me as somebody that's going to listen to them and I listen. And I don't feel like I need to offer anything back. You know what I mean? And so
Uh-huh.
it's not a bad thing that I don't get a lot of talking in, but I do become that person where it's just listen, 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 listen.
Yeah. Well, and interestingly enough, that's what most people need. They just need to be heard. It may sound like people are looking for advice or looking for wisdom or but really what they're looking for is a space to process whatever it is themselves.
Hmm.
And they need in our careers here, it's called holding space, but I'm pretty much just listening. And then before I've even said two words, they're like, this was so helpful. And I haven't done anything. They've done it, but they just needed a space to kind of work through it all out loud. And it makes a big difference. So that absolutely enhances relationships, whether it's professional or personal. But again, it causes an awakening, I think, inside of each of us to realize a multitude of things. The human condition, the when you talk to enough people, you start to see most people have the same problems when you get down to the root of it. So we are bonding. We all share, you know, many of the same experiences, even though they're different for each person. But I'm saying the actual events in life we share, the challenges with relationships. Most of us have the same. If you sit down with a group of women and say, "What's the one thing that irritates you most about your husband?" It's going to be things like he doesn't do the dishes, he doesn't take out their. It's usually like these little things that are not the issue, of course, again. But if you keep listening, you start to recognize what the real issue is. I think another thing that it does, and this was an area I used to be grossly lacking in, is it cultivates patience. Like once you stop chomping at the bit to say something, okay, what are you really doing? You're learning patience. Be quiet, listen, wait. Again, another aspect of mindfulness is acceptance in general, but in this case, it would be accepting the other person for who they are. And again, this goes back to close relationships, like and this may be a generational thing, but I really believe that part of my job was to help my husband get to where I needed him to be. To be the way I wanted him to be. And our job is not to try to change another human being, it's to accept them
Yeah.
as they are. And that includes the things you don't like. I have to remind myself, I'm sure there are many things, he or she doesn't like about me. But there's something there that creates a relationship. So how about we look at, okay, I don't agree with you about that, but I get it. That's what you want to do, or that's how you are. And then you check in with yourself to figure out, why does that bother you?
In my marriage, I have to do that a lot where I have to tell myself, as much as this is annoying me, him doing whatever he's doing, there's obviously things I do. I'm not perfect. I know I'm not. So there's obviously things I do that must really irritate him. And he doesn't really bring things up. There's really never a conversation about those things. And so I feel like, is it worth it to really bring it up if it's bugging me? Because it's not that big of a deal. And I think it's another thing of like, people say choosing your battles. I think of it as, is this something that's going to benefit our relationship? Or is this something that I can deal with that really isn't that big of a thing to me? And the reason it's bothering me is so minor, it's really just not something that I even need to bring up.
And certain things, that I notice even living with someone is there are lots of little irritants.
Mhm.
Another person doesn't behave the way you do, or, we have a real issue with clutter and like things not being put where they go, like little things that I can allow myself to get really irritated about. And I have to like really back up. And this is part of mindfulness. Again, mindfulness is mostly about you being aware of what's going on in you as well as what's going on externally. And it'll be like, what is this about? Why does it bother me that there's like stuff all over the counter or something? And it's a combination of things. Part of it is it's extra work for me, frankly. What, 2 seconds of extra work? Like I have to really think about it, instead of getting irritated about it. But at the same time, it's like, okay, he is seeing the world from a different perspective. He sees it from what's the big deal? I'll get it later. Or, you know what I mean? Like whatever it may be. So again, it's not really his issue. It's not a relationship issue. It's a me issue. Is it control? Is it really about work? Is it about not feeling appreciated or respected? But you can kind of go through your own little list of why does this one little thing set me off in a direction I don't want to go in for the day?
Mine is making the bed. And this is never going to change. We've been together now for 20 something years and it's never going to change. So I've given up on that happening. I love having the bed made. There's a lot of reasons why. One of it is, it's a good habit to have, but also I just like the cleanliness of it. I like not having clutter. I like walking into the bedroom and going, and for him, he's like, why? I'm just going to get back in it. Nobody sees our room. And it's like, but I see it. I want the bed made. I want it to look clean. So it really does boil down to, this is about me. This is not about him. He's fine with it.
Yeah.
So if he's fine with it, that's great. But for me, then I'm the one. If I want something to change, then I need to do it because this is my issue. This is not his. So
Right.
for me, then I just end up making the bed every morning, which is fine. But it took a long time to get to that point of like, why can't you just make the bed?
And again, this applies to all kinds of relationships. If you have teenagers, pause and think about what are you getting upset about that they're not, they are human beings. They've got their own personalities, their own character traits, their own experiences. And it's really about us wanting everyone to sort of mirror us, right? In a way, we
Hmm.
want them to be just like us, and then we'll be happy.
Hmm.
And so, from a mindful perspective, we know that is not true, number one. But number two, it's like, well, if you can accept that another human being may be different than you can still have a relationship with that person by being respectful of the fact that you have your own quirks, they have their own quirks. And then on the flip side, they also have lots of lovely attributes, as do we, right?
Yeah.
So it's really a matter of, I love the bed thing because it's like, it's not even just the bed, right? There's another issue there, which is there something unfair about this? Why do I have to make the bed all of the time? And that's where really the whole concept of acceptance, non-judgment is huge. Like that's a huge part of mindfulness is to do things non-judgmentally. I still struggle with this one, honestly. And I hear my ego going, but that's just not right. Why would you do this way? Or that's judgment. When you create an environment of judgment, then of course the other person, and again, any kind of relationship, whether it's your kids, your coworkers, whoever it is, then they're going to feel criticized. And if they feel criticized, they are not going to be open or vulnerable with you because they don't want to be criticized.
Like you said earlier, the whole it's not fair.
Yeah.
I feel like that is the basis of so much of our strife as, a society is this fairness thing. And don't get me wrong, I do, think certain things are unfair and certain things are fair. But that is my moral compass, and nobody else's moral compass is exactly the same as mine. It could be similar to somebody else's, it could be vastly different from somebody else's, but we really do judge other people based on our own moral compass and values.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is the heart of a lot of the problems we have. You're spot on with the fact that it's so individualized, and yet we expect everyone to follow our values and our morals and our ethics. That's a quagmire because we just can't as human beings. And that does extrapolate out into society's woes because everybody wants everybody else to agree with them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's mindless because it's not possible.
No, and how boring would life be if we all agreed with each other?
Yeah,
We need a
exactly.
little conflict.
Yeah. Well, and conflict itself is a whole nother topic because and I was guilty of this myself, but to me, conflict equated to confrontation. And so I always wanted to avoid conflict. And conflict means there's a difference of opinion. That's it. It doesn't have to become a confrontation. So if we are trying to build a relationship with someone or strengthen it or start one, then the path to sort of reaching this state of really effective communication is to really get that there will be conflicts. They're unavoidable because you've got two people who are different. Even if they seem very alike, they're different. So there's always going to be conflict. So the key isn't to avoid the conflict. The key is to be able to talk in a safe space, right? Where you don't feel like you're going to be criticized or judged, or someone's not going to like you anymore or love you anymore, whatever the case may be, but where you're creating that environment that is really about trust. You trust that you're okay with you and that they're okay with themselves, and that the two of you can talk about things without it damaging your, what it damages is your ego, but where it's really not damaging your actual identity. You're
Yeah.
still are who you are.
With parenting, it's difficult too because we want so badly for our kids to not make the mistakes that we made. And we want so badly for them to be happy and to succeed and to have all of these things in life that we never had, right? But we forget, like you said earlier, that human element. Like maybe what I see as success and happiness and, even being a good person, maybe the way I see that is completely different than the way that they see it. And here we are trying to push our ideas onto our children, forgetting that they are still forming all of those things in their life. And the more that we push ideas on them, then they're not really being true to who they really are. And that we need to allow them to kind of find their own moral compass instead of us pushing our moral compass onto them.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's a really good point. And it's hard. I remember, I don't know, when one day a light bulb went off that even small children are human beings. And I don't mean that as bad as it sounds, but it's sort of like the way I was raised is that, you're supposed to mold your children. They're
Yeah.
not human yet. I mean, that was they didn't say that, but it was like they're not people yet. And yes, they are. My children had very strong ideas about certain things even at a young age, right?
Hmm.
So it's when I had that moment of, oh, they're just their own little individual, like they have their own ideas. It was like an aha moment for me. And I do think, I think parents now have gotten maybe much more attuned to that, but at the same time, I agree with what you're saying. Is there's still that drive to somehow influence them in a direction that you think will prevent them from being having their feelings hurt or struggling, or any of the things that we hate to watch our children go through, but which are part of developing your own character and resilience and all of the things that we need as adults. So
And judgment really comes into it heavily because when something happens to one of my kids, like they get upset about something or something that I would get upset about, and they don't get upset about it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, don't you understand how big of a deal this is? And it's like, yeah, I get it. But they don't react the way I would react. And you're thinking to yourself, well, they must not get it.
yeah,
No, they do. They just aren't you. They're not going to react the way that you do. And I struggle with this with my husband a little bit. It's that, you know, he was raised a certain way and that you're supposed to act a certain way and you're supposed to, have certain feelings about certain things. And that's not really the path that my son follows. He's kind of on his own little way. And I think it bugs him. I think he's kind of like, why isn't he getting more mad about this?
yeah,
That's not in him.
yeah,
He's not that person. And I think it's hard to remind ourselves that they are not us. While they are a reflection of us,
yeah,
they are
absolutely.
not us.
that kind of reminds me of another thing, which is talking about getting upset about things, is managing our emotions. I don't know. I think I kind of had two emotions. I mean, obviously more. There really are only two emotions. It's fear and love. But when I was younger, I was kind of like an extreme at each end. I was either really happy or really mad. Like there wasn't a whole lot in
Yeah.
between. I'm a really happy person by nature, but if you made me mad, I was really unhappy, like instantaneously. And of course, demonstrated that. And so, over the years, as I've practiced more and more, it's amazing to me that something can happen. And maybe, your son is already well on this path, but something will happen. And I'm no longer typically reactionary. It's more a matter of I take it in, I really think about it. And that can even be in the middle of a really sort of harsh disagreement. I tend to not react at all immediately. Instead, I really am able most of the time to respond. But at the same time, it's my mindfulness skills that help me not allow my emotions to overtake me. They want to. You can't stop an emotion from arising. So I may actually really dislike whatever just happened, and my body physiologically reacts. But now I am able to either breathe, count to 90, because that rush of hormones actually starts subsiding in 90 seconds. I will take action specifically to not react. And that act alone then does not give the other person cause to attack, right? Which is what we do when there's a heated discussion. But it's just that extra attention to the fact that anything we say can either enhance a relationship or it can harm a relationship. So when you start to put the weight of the responsibility of what you say in a relationship to that level, it causes you to give it more attention instead of just reacting from an ego based perspective.
Yeah. And by no means are we saying you have to be agreeable.
Right.
You can still have a wonderful conversation. And when I say wonderful, I don't mean people are walking away with smiles on their face.
Right.
I mean, people mostly got what they wanted out of the conversation, or you walked away without a negative feeling in your gut. You don't have an argument, you don't have that body reaction.
Yeah.
And I just had this a couple days ago where the old me probably would have knee jerk reacted and said something really snarky that probably would have made the conversation go very poorly. But instead, I immediately could realize this isn't going to change. I'm not getting through to this person
Yeah.
what I'm trying to say. And so I'm just going to stop. We're just not going to agree, which is fine. You don't
Right.
have to agree, but you
Yeah.
can still have the conversation. And I walked away saying, I heard what you said, and I hope you heard what I said and what I had to say and what I meant. We both understood each other, and we just decided it wasn't something we were going to agree on. And instead of harboring that resentment and that anger, 2 hours later, sitting on the couch, we were still having great conversation and laughing and joking, and we moved on. And
Yeah.
that's another big one is when you have those mindful conversations, you don't you don't have that gross feeling after you have the conversation where you feel like 2 weeks later you're still holding on to it and you can't let go of it. It's gone. It's gone.
Yeah. It's almost hard to describe the difference it makes in a relationship, because as you're enhancing that trust and building that environment with that person, you are not just enhancing that one relationship. You're beginning to create a network of people that you can communicate with, even about difficult things, or maybe about very personal things, that provides you in the long run a support system for when things get rough, and vice versa. So, and again, it doesn't matter. It could be your children, your significant other, friends, coworkers, whatever the bigger environment is, but you're actually contributing to this environment that helps everyone then start to benefit from this ability to talk about either difficult things or personal things or things that make us feel vulnerable. And each time you do that, it's almost like adding another little brick to this house of sort of safety and security and support, which we all need these days.
You'll also find that there's people that just aren't ready for that. And don't give up on them.
Yeah.
You can still have a relationship with them, but just understand that you might have to work on your non-judgment skills quite a bit, because those are the people where they aren't going to understand what you're saying. They aren't going to be able to communicate with you the way that you're communicating. And that's okay.
Yeah.
Only what you can only handle your own communication. That's it. So if you can do it on your own side, you're going to be the one that benefits. They might benefit just from witnessing it, but this is about you. This is not about fixing other people, changing other people, getting them to come to your side. That's not what mindful relationships are about. Mindful relationships are, like you said, it's about accepting the other person for what they believe and what they think.
And that's a really good sort of segue to the idea of shifting our own mindsets. Of course, there are people that are difficult that, maybe you try to establish, and this goes probably more to work or to organizational things like whether it's church or work or volunteering, but where you you have to have a relationship with someone, but they are, so vastly different than you and aren't willing to listen to anything but their own perceptions of things.
Yeah.
Instead of feeling like, I don't want to have to talk to this person. I don't want to have a relationship with this person. You're in a relationship with that person. Right? So whether you like it or not. So instead of feeling dread or feeling judgment or, all of the typical things we would do, in my mind, what pops into my head is, okay, school's in session. This is my chance to really hone my skills, which is getting to that point that it's like, okay, if you want to rant and rave and yell and call people, whatever the thing is that's somehow really triggering me, it's me forcing myself, but just listen, don't judge. Don't, those words are going through my head sometimes. I'm trying to listen, but I have to also protect my own rush of emotion so that they don't come out. Right. So maybe you can't listen quite as well. Okay. That's practice. So the more you can do that, the better you get at it. So it's always the most difficult people in our lives that help us grow the most.
Hmm.
Not the easy ones, it's the difficult ones. And so if you enter into that, work day or that conversation or whatever it is with that in mind, okay, what can I learn from this today? How can I strengthen my skills to better listen to this person? Things like that. Then you're still making it a productive conversation. And in a weird way, it's still a better relationship because that person is getting to say what they need to say. They need to be heard, right? And you're learning to hone your own mindfulness skills to be better at it. So at least it's not the feeling of it's a waste of time or there's no point in doing this. You're giving it some meaning.
Mindfulness not only helps in the way that like you can identify your ego reaction. For me, what's really helped is my physical, like you were saying earlier, your physical reaction. Sometimes my body works faster than my brain. So when I'm having that conversation where I'm starting to feel my body reaction, where it's like my heart starts racing, or maybe I get clammy or I get tense and tight, that's when I know something not great is going to come out of my mouth. So that's when I go, okay, now it's time to just take a deep breath and really hone in on those skills that I've learned, because your body will tell you so many different things.
Definitely. It's so strong sometimes. That's why I'm saying maybe you're not really fully listening when that happens because
Yeah.
you have to take care of yourself in those situations. And it can be overwhelming sometimes if it's, a really hot issue or one of your trigger points or something. I mean, and that's just human. Again, we can't stop our emotions from rising. We can't stop our bodies from responding to the hormones the brain is flooding us with, right?
Yeah.
But we got to, get control and not say anything for a minute to think. And that's the part that we frequently leave out. I know when I was, again, younger, I was hesitant to bring up in a relationship maybe what I needed
Mm.
because I was afraid of how the other person would react. Or, again, it goes back to this. We make all these assumptions about the other person. And once I learned mindfulness and really started practicing it, you can't just understand it cognitively, obviously. You have to practice it to be able to do these things. But then I realized by either not asking for what I need or not doing what I need because I think it's going to upset the other person, I'm harming the relationship. Because then what happens? You start to get resentful or you start to feel it's unfair or all those negative connotations come up in a relationship. So I think once you're comfortable in being mindful, then you're able to go to another person, even if, I mean, maybe you really know they're not going to like it. And you can say, I really need to share with you that I need to do this or that, whatever it is. And I want to hear from you why you may not agree with that or what aspects of it would upset you. so that you're not going in with the defensive, I need this, I'm going to do it. Too bad. It ruptures the relationship in some way. So, in a way, it builds confidence in your ability to be self compassionate, to say, it's okay that I actually really want or need to do this. And you may not agree with me. You may not understand why. I'm happy to try to explain if you want to know, but this is something important to me. And I think that is an area where a lot of relationships get, it's not about fairness, it's about they get unbalanced.
Mhm.
Like the person who assumes they can't do something that they want or need because they don't want to upset the other person keeps thinking if they just keep accommodating the other person, that will make the relationship better.
Yeah.
And it doesn't.
My early years of, dating and relationships, I was like that. I never spoke up for myself and I never wanted to, I avoided conflict, not necessarily because of the other person, but I knew myself. I knew how I was in a conflict and I could get nasty. And I'm so glad that I learned to not be that way because it doesn't get you anything except for more nastiness. And so I would never say, like, if something was upsetting me, or I would never say that I needed something or that I didn't trust them about something, just because I didn't want to get into that argument because I knew it wouldn't go anywhere. I knew I wouldn't get what I wanted. And now I feel like that's probably the healthiest part of my relationship is that we've both learned that if we hold stuff inside, eventually it's going to just blow, right? If you just keep something under the surface for so long, you're going to keep carrying that resentment and it's going to blow up into something that it never should have been in the first place. And if we can actually see the other person's bothered by something and they're not saying anything, we will say, okay, what's going on?
Yeah.
And no matter how reluctant the other person is, we will talk about it. I think that has been the saving grace of our relationship is we no longer leave things unsaid that are important. I'm not talking about like making the bed, but
Yeah.
talking about more important things that are bothering us. We definitely talk about it. And even with friendships, I think that's important, not just your, relationships with your spouse or your significant other or even your kids, but your friendships. It's really important. If something's bugging you, don't let it go. Don't let it go if it's important to you.
Is you look at your circle of friends, is everyone kind of alike? Maybe building your mindfulness skills would help you diversify your circle of friends. And the reason it's important is because if we don't have that, we're missing out on gaining other perspectives. It's that expansion of our ability to accept people for who they are, but still see the most beautiful traits in them. Having a mindful relationship really enriches life. It definitely leads to personal growth. So I think there's a lot of benefit to that. And I think there's not enough of that, again, in the world because we typically hang out with people very similar to us. And when you start practicing mindful relationships, it gives you an opportunity to really broaden your perspective. And again, of course, their perspective. We're all benefiting from it.
It also helps you to realize that when you do have somebody that's so very different from you and their beliefs and their morals but you know that they're a good person. They may completely disagree with everything that you do, but you love them as a person. You don't have the relationship with them for nothing.
Yeah.
And then if you can take how you see that person as still having a good heart and still being a good person, and then compare, and I know we don't like to compare, but then compare to all of the other people that believe the same thing that they do,
Yeah.
and then maybe move your perspective a little bit toward, well, they're all still probably good people.
Yeah.
And it kind of helps soften those edges a little bit. And you see people a little more humanized.
Yeah. That is part of mindfulness is it really helps you develop empathy, which is
Mhm.
something that's lacking a little bit these days. Sometimes maybe when you meet someone, you think, nope, this is not going to be a good relationship. Like just listen first and look inwards. Are you creating the friction here?
Yeah. Instead of spending so much time trying to change people, we're really spending all that time doing that. We're masking the things that they actually are instead of the things that we want them to be.
And again, it's our own ego or it's our own values, ethics, morals that are not everyone's. And so once you can kind of let that go, you can really have a flourishing, healthy relationship with really just about anyone. Like, even those that oppose you or aren't on board with open communications or whatever, you're still either learning or modeling or expanding your perspective. So focusing on mindful relationships instead of ego based relationships makes a world of difference to our quality of life.
Absolutely agree.
Well, I will put up a meditation on strengthening relationships mindfully. I hope you give some thought to your relationships. Are you somewhat mindful? Is there room for growth? Things like that. And of course, don't be self judgmental. This takes practice because our egos are powerful. So it's not about acquiescing or giving up. It's about thinking mindfully through what it means to have a relationship, how valuable that is, and how you can contribute to it.
Yes, maybe spend a little less time worrying about how other people can change or improve to make you better and just think about what you can do to improve yourself in your relationships.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I thank you, and I hope we see you again next week.
Thank you.
This podcast is part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. Visit airwavemedia.com to listen and subscribe to other great shows. Visit our website, amindfulmoment.com, to access podcasts, scripts, and reading recommendations. A Mindful Moment is hosted by Teresa McKee and Melissa Sims. This podcast is produced by Work to Live Productions. Thank you for tuning in.